Welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. This evening's agenda does not include any public hearings. Bill, could you please take the roll?
Yes, Mr. Dean.
Here.
Mr. Freed.
Here.
Ms. Herron.
Here.
Mr. Kanar.
Here.
Mr. Kalp.
Here.
Ms. Messina.
Here.
Ms. Pearson.
Here.
Mr. Tababin. And Mr. Warner.
Here.
Okay. We have 8. We have a quorum. Mr. Freed, you are on mute.
Well, that would explain that. It appears first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. So if no one has any suggested changes, I would entertain a motion to approve.
This is Commissioner Kanar. I would move to approve the minutes.
Second. Second by Commissioner Kopp. Any discussion? All those in favor saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Any opposed? And I abstain as I was not present. Oh, yeah. Next item on the agenda is the 2021 Annual Dgm Report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. That is me. I've got a brief annual report that I think we've shown this in the past and want to show this to you again. For 2021, we presented this to the city council last week, and it is a kind of a let's see here. Let's make sure I got this going right. All right. Are you seeing my notes? There are no notes, but are you seeing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We are.
All right. Then we will do that. Okay. So we present this annual report. Actually, we do it on a quarterly basis. And it goes over gives an overview of the development activity in the city through the lens of our permitting activity here in development services. And so you can kind of get a sense of the trends that we have going on. And I think it's good information for the Planning Commission to hear and see. And I would invite you to interrupt me as I go along, and if you need to ask any questions. There's a lot of information that I'm not going to pause on the slides very, very long. So before I move on, if there's something you want to clarify, that just jump in. One of the reasons we do this is to kind of show alignment with our land use and growth management plan and the policies to try and encourage more development within the tier 1 of our urban growth area, which is the city limits. After I present, you'll hear a presentation from Dan Warner, who will go over the policies outside of our city limits in relation to the item you heard last month. We thought it'd be a good idea to kind of give everyone an overview of those policies. But for right now, this is just pertaining to inside the city. So the first First slide gives you a sense of our total building permit activity. It is trending up, which is generally a good sign for development. We had 522 permits last year. That is although it's just a tick above the previous year, it's about a 10% increase in permits from our 5-year average. The blue line is residential, the red line is commercial. As you can see, we get a lot more residential permits than commercial. That's pretty typical in any city. One of the big surprises, not surprise, but one of the big highlights, I guess I would say, is that our housing unit count within the city, at least those that have been permitted, is gone up exponentially over the last 2 years. 394 units were permitted last year. That is up from 293 the year before, which is quite a bit. But if you take those last 2 years, 2021 and 2020, we permitted more housing units in those 2 years than we did the previous 5 years total combined. So you can kind of see down there the average. Let me do something here. The average, 5-year average, it's 158% increase over our 5-year average it was last year. So as you can see, kind of that red line just, again, exponentially going up based on our average. We were in the 110 to 120 unit range a year. And as you see, we're at 293 and 394 last year. Okay. Why?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Mayor, well, so what are the blue line additions? Is that like additions to already existing subdivisions just being added? Or what does the blue line represent?
That's correct. That blue line is just when people come in to do a permit, they're remodeling or adding on to their home. So
okay,
we had a little spike last year, not last year, the COVID year, 2020. We saw a lot of rehabs and remodels come in. You can kind of see that little peak there. It kind of settled back down and into a little more average last year.
Bill, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do we know what to attribute this trend to?
Yes, I think you certainly have some idea. Let me move on to the next slide. That might help.
Okay.
We're certainly not going to get to that high of a count without doing more multifamily units. And for this slide, and when I say multifamily, I really mean non-single family detached. So duplexes are counted in this, anything attached, any unit, new unit attached. As you can see, last year, 75% of all of our units were in that category. We're in multifamily unit category. And if you look at the bars here on the far right, that's last year, that's 2021. And then in the middle is 2020. So 2/3, now 3/4 this year, multifamily. That's a good trend, that's a good sign. The previous decade was down at 39% for multifamily unit creation. We really slacked off, tailed off quite a bit in that decade, did not have a lot of, certainly what you would consider the more traditional multifamily being built. The big unit, big project this year, last year, 2021 would have been Wheatfield Village, 173 units. That's probably certainly the first market built new construction apartments in pre-recession. And as a matter of fact, and I forgot to point this out, that if you go back to that unit count there, at 394, that red line, that is the highest we've done since the recession, or I should say before the recession. So that is noteworthy. And as to why we're doing more multifamily, which might be your next question, again, the housing studies that we've been doing for the market studies that we've been doing or had done had shown a tremendous demand for multifamily units. So there's purely a pent-up demand in Topeka for that. So this is somewhat responsive to that need. This may even out as we go along in the next few years, but I don't know. I mean, we did see an uptick in single-family development. We were doing probably 75, 80 single-family units a year a couple years ago for the decade, and we did 100 last year. So it's not a tremendous jump, but it certainly is several steps up than what we would normally be doing. So across the board, we saw more unit production, and then, but I think between some of the incentives, Wheatville Village, for instance, would not have happened without a TIF district. We've also had some others come on board, such as the Casson building at 6th and Topeka, 40. It's in the low 40s for new units. Those were all either low-income tax credits, neighborhood revitalization program, or historic tax credits. So that was a multi-layer incentive development. So we do have a lot of incentives targeted to attract that sort of unit.
So you indicated that this is kind of a pent-up demand. Do you know at this point, are we on pace to meet the demand now that this ball has started rolling? Or, I mean, I know you can't predict the future, but how is it looking to continue this pace?
That's a good question. We've got several projects in the pipeline. They haven't come out of that pipeline, and when I say pipeline, it's probably we have had pre-application meetings on a number of projects. Whether or not they come to fruition is still yet to be known. We don't have, I mean, we could have one major project come online and it would dwarf even these counts. So you don't know, but we are definitely getting more knocks on the door, more tires kicked, a lot of people interested in trying to do multifamily. And at the very least, again, don't forget, we're talking duplex and triplex and fourplex sort of developments. We're including assisted living and independent living, over 55, affordable market rate, workforce. So we're including everything in there. What I didn't break out here was kind of on the affordable side and market rate side. And that I do think we have a couple on the affordable or workforce side that could be coming online, hopefully very, very soon.
I thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, if I might, before we move on too far, I'm curious. I haven't looked recently at numbers on our occupancy. I have to assume if these units are being built, they're also being filled. Is this population growth, or is this families spreading out, parents moving into condos and leaving adult children behind, or adult children moving out on their own? Do you have a sense?
Well, I would say that anything above our 5-year average or our decade average, which again, remember, was in the 110, 120 a year, and when we start going north of that, and this is significantly north of that, probably 3 times last year north of that, that should equate and correlate to new population. Vacancies are pretty tight. Certainly on the housing inventory side of things, on the single family side of things, not having new units, multifamily units built in over 15 years or so, those have had an impact, not only just from a vacancy standpoint, but when you do build new, when you do have new amenities and I guess a more modern inventory, you're going to raise all boats with that. So there's going to be more competitive rates. You're kind of going to lift all boats with that. And so, I do think it will correlate to new heads, if you will, in the community, certainly at that scale.
Bill, I had a quick question. When it comes to building permits, is there an ideal number that the city likes for us to be at, or just as long as we're continuing to grow?
Yeah, it's not an exact 1-for-1. We're going to add a unit and we get a new person, but I would say, like I said, anything over the historic average. And we knew the historic average in the 2010s, we were flat by all accounts, census-wise. We were technically according to the census, we added population between 2019 and 2020. But if you look from 2010 to 2020, we were, I think, 1,000 folks under. So I don't know that there's a 1-for-1 correlation, but where we like to be at, we want to be probably on par with some of our comparable neighbors, and we'll show that slide later. If you're doing double what your historic is, I don't know that there is a magic number, but you want to be. You want to be seeing things like this. You want to have inventory that's, we talk about diversifying the housing stock, having more housing choices. We're not really pushing out our footprint. So you're really densifying, being more compact. So you're being a lot more cost efficient with delivering services. You're delivering services on the same footprint as you were. With fewer units. So I struggle to say what that number is, Commissioner Herron. I just it probably can't be too low. There can't be a low enough number, or maybe I should say a high enough number here.
And also, I was going to see if I could answer Commissioner Kernar's question about the housing inventory. So in order for there to be a more level inventory between buyers and sellers, ideally we want to be at about a 6 months worth of housing stock. Right now we're at about 2 weeks, and we have one of the largest demographics ever that are now ready to buy homes, which are millennials, and baby boomers aren't really moving. So a lot of what's attributing to these increase in building permits is just we don't have the housing to meet just the demand in general. And the issue with housing stock going down has been happening since 2015, but it's a result of what happened in 2010 with people not building homes. So I just wanted to kind of add that in there when we're talking about who is buying. A lot of what you're seeing right now are millennials who are now able to buy but don't have any homes to purchase. So I think it might be people moving into the city, but also current residents as well. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, if these numbers were all single family, or 80% single family units, I wouldn't feel as good about saying you've got a population growth correlation. But because we're getting an inventory that is new basically to Topeka, that means people are not just necessarily moving out of one type of house into another type of unit. Quite honestly, if we can do more multifamily, that will have a good relief on the Gen Z and that younger side of things, as well as on the baby boomer side of things, and the Gen X who's starting to get into that point where they want to get out, they want to downsize, and so they want to get into something that they don't have to maintain. So as we continue to diversify, that's nothing but good, because as Commissioner Herron says, it kind of sets us up. If I leave my unit now because they're building an apartment for 55 and over, well, that frees up something for somebody that's in the age that wants to do a single family and kind of cycle through that inventory and recycle that inventory. We also look at where the new units are being built relative to the city versus the county. If you can kind of read this over the 2010s, most of the, this shows you the percentage of all units occurring within the city. So you can kind of see, they're 50% and under through most of the 2010s. And then last 2 years, has gone up to over 70. If I can get this out of my, I blocked myself. 72 to 75% over the last 2 years, which is much more in keeping with where we think it should be. And again, that all that is really attributable to is the multifamily unit creation. Because again, we're just doing a few more single families. The county doesn't do a lot of multifamilies, and that tends to create that sort of percentages that you're seeing there.
Bill?
Yes.
Just a quick question. This is really good information. When it says dwelling units in the county, is that just talking about the unincorporated part of the county? Or I'm thinking of Silver Lake and Rossville. I'm sure the number of dwelling permits aren't huge in those towns, but how are those counted? Are they part of this chart or not?
If they get a permit through Shawnee County, they are on this chart.
Well, if it's inside the city limits of Silver Lake, where is that off the chart?
I cannot answer that. I don't know if they get a permit through the county or not.
Okay. Fair enough. Thanks.
This slide shows where the new units were created. The green circles are the subdivisions and projects where the new units were permitted last year. For instance, the highest subdivision or the subdivision with the most units was number 4, the Horseshoe Bend subdivision that had 23 units permitted last year. That's around 45th and Topeka. The project with the highest was, as I said, Wheatville Village here, number 7 at Fairlawn and 29th. The orange dots and circles, those are the new subdivisions and the lots that have basically been added to the pipeline for future single and 2-family development. You as a commission have approved all 3 of those last year, and it's about another 190 unit, not 190 lots for single and 2-family future. And why is that important? When you look at this next slide, we keep a running track of what our inventory is for single and 2.
Bill, I have a quick question.
Yes.
You might be answering it in this next slide. I'm not sure. Is there any concern that all of these are on the edges of the city and vast areas are not being developed with new places?
Good question. The you know, realistically, there's the new subdivisions are on the edge of the city. That's where they
Well, I'm
have.
also talking about the new housing units as well.
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily show. It would if there was a big enough project, such as I talked about Casson, which is right downtown at 6th and Topeka, which is a great project, but that was in 2020. There was several in 2020. The Calamar project, which is on the more central Topeka, 130 some units. There's also some others.
Okay, so if I saw year to year, I would see a much smoother development pattern.
Yes, you would. This snapshot of last year, actually, all of these dots indicate where the units are. I just blew up the dots where the bigger subdivisions were, so you can kind of see these smaller. I don't know what color that is. Olive dots with the houses on them. That's where all the permits were for new units. So you can get a sense that, yeah, there was not, and I don't know if this, for instance, I don't know if this dot was 5 units or 1 unit, but you can get a real sense that, again, most new single family, which is kind of what this is showing, is happening where there are subdivisions on the fringe. But yeah, it is absolutely. There's really, I mean, you have to make sure you're doing it all. When I say do it all, we've got to do that. That new multifamily. We got to do more multifamily, more density, and that's probably gonna, then bring more of the city into play as to where that can happen. And
it was helpful letting me know what those other little dots were.
Okay, great. So this is, so we're just trying to focus on, okay, for those, what Commissioner Herron talked about with people looking for homes, do we have enough of them? Do we have enough in the pipeline? Because it kind of, you cycle through, you move some people out of an older home into a newer home, or an entry-level home into another, I'm sure there's another term, more mid-stage home. So then you can have a new family come into an entry-level home, and you can kind of have a domino effect. But this shows you, we have over here, you can see 5.65 years worth of single and 2 family lots that are what we call buildable and prime. These are buildable prime vacant lots, which mean they have streets or benefit district that were platted since 1970. Those does not include everything. It just includes what we would consider the more recent in the last 40 or so years. So you can kind of get a good ballpark of, okay, where are we with our inventory for lots? Again, 5.65 years. Those plats that you approved last year would add ultimately another couple years onto that when they get approved for a benefit district. Once you get under 5 years, you really need to be planning, otherwise you're going to create another chokehold on at least on this side of the market with single and 2 family, because it takes about 5 years to probably get a unit in the ground on the single family side. That you go through the pre-planning, you go through the platting, then you have to get an improvement district approved, streets and the sewer and water and utilities put in, and then you start selling lots and building homes, and that's another year. So you're really in the 4 year cycle just from the time you have a lot approved. So you really want to start paying attention. Hey, are we running out of space? When it starts to get down to that 4 to 5, under 5, we really need to pay attention of where are we going with our next generation of subdivision building to meet demand. Okay, let's just pivoting over to the commercial side of things. We saw a little uptick in commercial permits last year, 7.5%. We did 186 permits, but it's still below our 5-year average, which would coincide with pre-COVID levels. We really dropped off, as you can kind of see by the dip here in 2020. We were really off from our previous years. We had a couple peaks there. So commercial wise, we're doing good, but we did not get back to our pre-COVID levels yet. When you look at all of our permit value, you get a good sense of, okay, even though we may have underperformed with our total permits on the commercial side, how is our overall value doing? Our construction value, you can see we did 185 million in construction value with our permits last year. That is a very good number, even though it's down from the previous year. The previous year had a huge project. The Walmart distribution center was a massive value in that number. So it was a bit of an outlier. So we overall pretty good, I would say overall. As you can see, we're 10% above our 5-year average. So that kind of corresponds to what we're seeing with our total permits. We run through kind of the top 10 valued permits. This just shows like the top 4. Wheatfield Village Apartments, the Hills Minor Ingredient Handling Yard down at the river, Cedarhurst of Topeka, which is our assisted and memory care living facility at 17th and Urish, and then you got the Washburn School of Law. Those were in our top 5. You can kind of see the rest there. We had the zoo, giraffe barn. We had a church, Countryside United Methodist. We had the Gage Center renovations by Advisors Excel. You had a KU health system renovation. And then you also had Charlie's Car Wash at Ashworth and Huntoon. I'd rounded out the top 10 value permits. The last set of slides are just a comparison to some other of our neighbors. The first slide looks at the residential permits, and a couple caveats here. So we looked at Manhattan. Manhattan's in blue, Lawrence in orange, and Wyandotte is in gray. Topeka's in yellow. The total residential permits here on the left side, we found out we had a little apples to oranges issue going on here. As you can see, Wyandotte way, twice as many as Lawrence, and almost 3 times as much as us. We found out that as we dug deeper, they include a lot more residential permits than we do in our counts. There's a lot more minor permitting going on there. So it's about 40% of that total is what their permits are. So they probably are in second position compared to Lawrence. We're in third position for total permits. Probably the truer apples to apples would be looking at just at our housing units. The housing units here, again, we're in third position. We had a record year. We're still in third position. Not too far off, though, at all from Lawrence, which we didn't look back, but I would say this really probably would have paled in comparison in years past, previous to 2020. Wyandotte with 503. They had a pretty big project come in right at the end of the year, or else they would have been in third position. So that's Manhattan, very, very low otherwise. So that kind of gives you an idea on the residential side where we compare. On the commercial side, our total permit count, we actually are in first position. Not a huge surprise. We have a lot of commercial and industrial base here. I would say Wyandotte also has that, but probably not like Topeka. And then, so first on the commercial side of things, permit value wise, again, same thing is happening. Wyandotte's a little bit of an orange to our apples here, but we're still in third position, just behind Lawrence with our permit value. Okay, I believe that is all I have. If you ever want to dig deeper, we release these every month. The development and growth management reports, and they have these numbers month to month in there, and you can just Google DGM Reports Topeka, and that should take you to the webpage, and you can view the current reports as well as from previous years. Okay, I'll stop there and I'll stay here. Are there any other questions or comments for me? Okay. Well, I will, if that was, hopefully that was helpful. We get a lot of questions, and it's not always, we can share things during the year. Sometimes things change quite a bit in the mid-year. So definitely by the end of the year, we have a good picture of what happened. And so hopefully you found that informative. Kind of leading into or leading from that, we wanted to take a step back and pick up kind of where we had some conversation going last month about the subdivision policies out beyond the city limits. We talked amongst us and thought it might be good to give you kind of a two-parter. The first part tonight, Dan would go over and just talk about those. How do we view, what are we doing? What are our policies beyond the city limits to prevent some of the sprawl characteristics that were prevalent in the past, and creating more of a encouragement to invest within our city limits, which is our priority growth area. So I think he's got a couple examples and that he can share, and then so we'll talk about outside the city this month, and then probably either this month or either in March or April, we'll see what our agenda is like. We'd like to have a follow-up discussion to talk about what we think a few recommendations we can make inside the city that could help drive even more of the sort of the density, certainly in the core area as well. You know, I didn't share where our incentives are, Commissioner Pearson, but we definitely have targeted our incentives to the core area and weighted those much more than outside. So that's something we can get into next month and talk more about the infill ideas that we want to talk to you about this year. For now, Dan, are you ready to roll?
I think so.
All right. So, Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'll have just Dan take it away.
Sounds good to me.
All right, commissioners, good evening. I'll jump right into this. So our first thing I want to show you is a 30,000 foot view of the Topeka urban growth area, and what we also call what we call the non-urban growth area, or non-UGA, also known as the extraterritorial jurisdiction, also known as the 3 mile area. So the existing city limits, you can see there in the light blue color. And then our urban growth area is that red line that's surrounding the city, a little tighter to the city. And then that cloud area that's farther outside into the county, that is the 3 mile area or the non-UGA. Topeka has platting authority outside the city and within that 3 mile area. When we updated the land use and growth management plan in 2014, we also changed the platting rules outside the city, and we'll touch on some of that in this presentation. If we look a little closer at the UGA and the non-UGA, you can see here the different tiers within the UGA begins with tier 1. So tier 1 is our existing city limits. This is the first priority for future urban growth. And that's because all 5 of the city's services, urban services are available, and that's fire, police, streets, water, and sewer. Tier 2 then is the kind of a smaller part of the urban growth area that's contiguous to the city limits and also to the 5 urban services. So tier 2 is the next priority for future urban growth and annexation. Tier 3 is the remainder of the, at least the residential part of the urban growth area. So tier 3 is that light green area there. So that's future city limits, but investments in all 5 of those urban services haven't been made yet, and generally not ready for annexation unless some major investments are made. And then finally, the non-UGA, this is the land outside the city between the urban growth area and the 3 mile area. So show a few examples here for different kind of development scenarios. So the first example is a tier 2 development. Some of you might remember this. It's just Sherwood Village. So this was proposed as an urban single family development. This property at the time was contiguous to the city boundary and obviously adjacent to a similar type of urban development pattern. This project required a major plat, so that's why it went to the Planning Commission for review, and then annexation as well, as they were connecting to city water and other services. So this is an example of this is an example where this is exactly where we want, that kind of development outside the city. If it's in tier 2, again, all 5 of those urban services were available. Pretty easy decision here to make to annex that property and bring it into the city. We don't really have a great tier 3 example. So this is kind of an anonymous property here in tier 3. One thing to note, this property is contiguous to the city boundary. That's the dash line there in the street. So tier 3 properties may or may not be contiguous to the city boundary. If urban development is proposed, then it's incumbent to evaluate the availability of urban services to serve that project. And it's possible to consider annexation if the property is contiguous and affordable for the city to serve that property. So there is some possibility that a tier 3 type urban development could be considered for annexation and into the city. We don't have good examples. There are some things in the hopper, but nothing we can really share at this point.
So Dan, if I could jump in on that. So when you talk about tier 3, again, that was that light green area on your 30,000 foot map. We still look at that as future city limits. So we've done the analysis, and this is back in when we put the growth management plan together, but we did the analysis of where our services could be most affordable. They're not all quite there in the tier 3s, but we still, if in fact there are policies decisions made that and budget decisions made that would extend and provide those services, all 5 of those urban services, to a tier 3 parcel, then it is and it's contiguous like this, then it is very possible that could graduate into the tier 2 level and become ready for annexation. I think Dan put this in there. I think we, without trying to complicate things, the 5 services may not all be the cities. There could be a water utility served by a rural water district. There could be a county sewer, but are those, and quite honestly, we don't have many, very, very few. I can think of one example where we have a rural water service within the city limits. And that was actually very recent annexation for one property. But this is just, I just wanted you to kind of wrap your heads around the fact that this is still considered future city limits if those policies can be satisfied.
All right, thank you, Bill. We'll look at a non.
If I can interrupt.
Sure.
I'm just curious. So there's no incentive for tier 2 or 3 at this time from the city, right? Or is there?
Kind of a tax incentives. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That is correct. If you are, because tier 2 and 3 are outside the city. So the only possible incentives would be the city saying, oh, yes, we would like to extend our sewer main or water main or improve a road. That would be the incentive.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so the next examples are, so the non-UGA. So this is the area outside of the urban growth area. We have an A and a B. And A you're familiar with. This is Metal Arc Square number 7. So public sewer was adjacent to this property. It was zoned commercial and recently downzoned by the county to single family residential. The context of the area is urban development that's west of Button Road. So the area contains high density residential, duplexes, single family, commercial development. So the project was supportable in part due to the context of the area. If we kind of contrast that with B then, so B is the area that's east of Button Road. The context here is more of a rural residential development. So if a plat is required, so let's say they can't meet the platting exemption or have to connect to sewer, we would apply the UGA development standards to that plat. So the development standards are bulleted out here. So a 20-acre minimum, 20% can be developed, sort of clustered, 80% set aside for future development. And then some standards are 300 feet of contiguous frontage, lot width to depth ratio no greater than 1:2. It's a little easier to show what we're talking about with the standards with a couple pictures. So, so this is a 20-acre parcel, and on the left there is the 80-20 development. So the 20% is the smaller parcel there, and it has, essentially showing one house on that. It doesn't necessarily have to just be one house on the 20%. If the land allows tighter lots than 3 acres for septic, then it's possible to have more than one lot on there. Also, if sewer happens to be adjacent, then it's possible to have a few more lots or a few more houses on that. So the 20% is the developable sort of part of that. The 80% is the remainder, what we're trying to preserve for future urban growth. It's possible we do permit a house to be built on that 80%. A couple things to point out also, there's a 300-foot minimum width. We use that as our standard because 300 feet, if you have a 60-foot road that divides that 20%, then you can have 120-foot deep lots on either side of it. So that's that 300 foot allows a splitting up for urban development. And then the 300-foot separation for the driveways also. So the image on the right is what we're really aiming for here with the urban with the UGA Development Standards. Again, that 2080, that 20 can be divided, and that 80 can be divided in the future as well.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could I ask you a question or two about this?
Sure.
Could you go back to the previous slide? You know, and I appreciate you guys going through this explanation, and I don't know, it was triggered by the discussion we had about the Meadowlark Square plat last month. My concern has been the city's role in developing or making possible to develop out at urban density properties that's in the non-UGA. And so my question for you is, in parcel B, if the owner of parcel B, the platting provisions that you have laid out here, am I correct in understanding that would be applicable if that owner came in with a plat for residential reserve property?
Yeah, if he was trying to divide that property in some manner, then and he couldn't do it through a platting exemption, then a plat would be required.
Right. So I own that property, and it has residential. I don't own that property. Okay, but if I were the owner of that property, and I have residential reserve zoning, and I maintain that zoning, come to the city for a subdivision plat, then these things that you've got laid out here are all applicable to me, the 80-20 and 300-foot frontage, right?
Yes.
But if I want to build out to urban density, I go to the county and I get R1 zoning, just like the Meadowlark Square folks did. And I understand they went from C2 down to R1, but I go from RR to R1. And now I approach the city. I've got my R1 zoning in hand, and I submit to you a subdivision, a plat application. What is there the staff? Is there something in the subregs that prevent you from that prohibit that application from going forward, since it was an RR to R1 upzoning? Or do you process the application and bring it to us, where we have essentially a ministerial duty to approve it if all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted? There was a question in there, and the question is, if I own property B and get it rezoned from the county to R1, like property A was, am I going to be able to put a subdivision in there because I have access to the Half-Day Creek sewer interceptor, right? And I've got rural water district water that's made available through the city of Topeka. So I've got everything I need. Why can't I build out at the same density as Meadowlark Square?
I'll answer, and then I think Bill will want to also, but I don't believe, for the reasons we've laid out here, the context is kind of the key in this decision. I don't think we'd support an increasing of intensity of that property based on sort of that context and based on the policies that we have. It's in our minds, it's a different situation than what's on the west side of Button. That would be my answer.
Well, let me ask you this though, Dan, does that mean that the plat application would not come to us, or it would come to us with a recommendation for denial?
If they went forward with a recommendation for denial, yeah, that's how it would come to you, I would imagine.
And what do we have in the subdivision regulations that speak to that? I'm now a disgruntled property owner because the county's given me R1 zoning for my 30, 40, 50 lots that I'm going to build out. And now it's the city of Topeka is saying, no, you can't, we're not going to approve the subdivision plat.
The link in the subdivision regulations is the comp plan, and I don't think the comp plan supports the intensification of that property.
Well, I'm not sure the comp plan, I went back and looked at the comp plan this afternoon, and I'm not sure it supports the plat in for Meadowlark Square.
Well, there is a section in the comp plan for non-UGA policies that kind of talks about why that one made sense, which would not, I don't think applies to B.
If I can jump in here.
Well, Bill, I'm sorry, just forgive me here, but I want to go back. I've been looking at the comprehensive plan on this issue, and I'm looking at page 19, where it says non-UGA area and utilities. And this is an overall goal. Curb rural residential sprawl within the non-UGA area by strengthening Topeka utility rules. Now, this was the plan that was adopted back in what, 2015?
Yes.
And that was a goal back then 7 years ago to strengthen utility rules. And I know I appreciate you guys indulging me here, and I'm not trying to go on a rant, but back in the old days, okay, when I was on the Metropolitan Planning Commission, you had a uniform set of city and county zoning and subdivision rules, and you had a principle of having what is urban is urban, what is rural. That was an overreaching policy. And then when the city and the county split, the Metropolitan Planning Commission, I was the chair of the Shawnee County Planning Commission for a couple of years, and we continued that policy. You know, what is rural should stay rural, what is urban should grow out urban density in the proximity of the city of Topeka. And when we add mass to properties like A and potentially B or whatever else, you know, it's property that may never become part of the city of Topeka, but is still growing out at urban densities, and it may become a more and more attractive location for subdivision scale development. End of rant.
Commissioner Cow, if you have the plan in front of you, you can refer to page 29, the bottom of page 29, and it talks about exceptions to the UGA standards for areas that are existing urbanized areas. And that's what A is. B, and what Dan's trying to say is B is not. B is, I guess, look at it this way. All the non-UGA area, all that area between our UGA and the 3 mile limit, the default standards are what you see on this slide here. And that would apply to B. The reason it did not apply to A, because we, through those policies on page 29, determined that this was an exception, and this was conforming to the policies of the plan. The reason it's an exception was the context being an urbanized area here, as you can see west of Button. That's exactly what it was platted and set up for. And that it was, in our minds, a lower intensity from what it was. And that's part of the policy. So we're trying to just explain a little more why A is an exception, but B is the rule. A is the exception.
You're the planning director, Phil, but I'm looking at the same map that you are, and I'm hard pressed to say that B is not in an urbanized area. Once A builds out anyway.
Well, fair enough. Yeah. We will. I just want you to know we advise people. This is what we are advising anybody that would come to us in that B area. It is not part of a plat. That A was already part of a plat and a planned out community. B is not.
Not by action of the county, not by action of the city.
Well, yeah, that's not material for us.
Okay.
If I can ask a question on that. So if we add in the factor of time, So if A gets completely developed and 10 years later, or 5 years later, B comes forward, and now we're looking at it and say, oh, well, A's already developed, so should we make B an exception? Is that something that's likely to happen to get approved?
I think we're saying that that's not what we would recommend to approve. We're not recommending anything east of Button. It has not been platted to an urban character. So no, think of west of Button as kind of a mini urban growth area outside the city. That's really what it is.
Okay. Yeah, because I just, I see some of these that come forward and they just worry me that they're maxing out the ability and maybe they're getting the land a lot cheaper than they would inside our city. So it's just creating more sprawl and people are leaving the city and the school districts are suffering because they're all pulling out. And I know you're going to talk about like incentives on another meeting, but it just worries me when I start seeing these come through that I feel like we're kind of being worked over by developers because they're finding these loopholes to build in cheaper areas than building within our city. That's what like worries me when I look at this stuff.
I think that actually probably is a more expensive area to build, actually. The land there would, it's an expensive area to buy land that's not too far from my house. I think the school districts might be the reason, maybe part of the reason why. And the other way to look at it maybe is that it's not taking from people moving into the city. That might be taking from people moving into Lawrence, and part of that might be the schools.
Yeah, and those are good notes. If you were with us, and I know many of you weren't, back when we adopted the Land Use and Growth Management Plan, the policy, this is a bit of a before these policies, there wasn't anything to say B couldn't be urbanized for that matter. So what we've done is we shrunk the area and we're much more specific as, okay, if we're going to create any exceptions for an urbanized development, it'll be only within those existing urbanized areas that are existing or were planned to be urbanized. Everything else outside of that has to meet what's on your slide there. That's a 20-acre minimum. Those are the 2080 development rules. The 300, so you don't have just a series of piano key lots everywhere. So it is these policies, and it may not feel like that, but we can attest to it because we see it every day. We get the calls, we work with people, and we give them bad news. You never see it, and I want you to know. I mean, it has shrunk the availability of what we would consider sprawling or the capacity to do sprawling lots outside the city, really to a minimum. And so we're hyper focused on this one area right now, which is a good example, but I can't really think there's a couple areas like this outside of our UGA that we bump up this into, but for 90% of it, you're going to have the standards that are on that slide there applied to them, and that's I think that's a good thing. It's certainly within your purview, though. If you feel a policy change is in need, that's why we're bringing this to you, and that's something the commission can consider.
Certainly appreciate that. I would maybe even recommend on the next subdivision plat that's like in one of these areas that maybe you list, or maybe it was there and I just missed it, the required specifics for the plat? Because that's ultimately what we're voting on, right? Is if it falls within our parameters or not.
Yeah, your vote. So there's two things. There's a technical, does this meet our technical design standards for a subdivision? And generally we'll do that work and we'll advise. The second part of that is policy. Part of a subdivision approval has to meet the city's comprehensive plan, and in this case, the land use and growth management plan. And so if we feel like it does not meet it from a policy perspective, even though the technical side, the streets are, the right of way is appropriate, the lot lines are appropriate, the density is appropriate, even if it meets that, we could still determine that it does not meet our policies, and you could, staff could recommend disapproval. You could also disapprove based on a policy basis.
Okay, thank you.
So, Bill, Dan, I have a question. So we talk about these exceptions relating to existing urbanized areas. Is there a definition of what that is? I mean, is there a time when something couldn't be considered, it wasn't urbanized by a certain time, so it could never become an existing urbanized area? Was that the idea of that term, or is it mean something else?
Commissioner Freed, there is not a specific definition in the LUGMA. What I would say is it was purposely done that way because you also have a vesting of development rights here issue. When you have platted out and when there's been prior approvals and infrastructure extended, there's some expectation there that west of Button you have, but when you don't have that, then it's a little bit more of the discussion we're having right now. Some can see it, some don't. Some think, oh, that looks like an urbanized area to me. No, we don't. We don't have it mapped. We don't have it defined any further than what we're describing here.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. I think
can I just leave it on that slide? Can everybody understand that the slide on the right is urban and the slide on the left is not urban? So when we talk urban, it's usually a density thing. It's or mix or non-residential uses mixed in with residential uses. So if you go, Dan, go back to the because I feel like while we don't have it defined on in black and white, that area to the west of Button, you can see the density. You can see the mixed use nature of it. You can, if you had the zoning map up, you'd see that as well. If you look, you don't have that density. You don't have that mix of uses. You don't even have that infrastructure as well. So there's a number of characteristics that we look at to define it, and that's probably the best I can try and explain that. Sorry.
No, it's fine. So yeah, the whole point of the 80/20, the Uga Development Standards, is to preserve land for future urban growth. So last thing we're going to show here is sort of that 90% that you don't see. This is the types of things that we deal with on a regular basis, and they're handled administratively. So this plat was called Oasis West, and that was a minor plat. Minor plats are administrative. In this case, there was no City of Topeka water or sewer service in this area. This would be in the non-UGA. They had to plat because they couldn't meet the platting exemption rules. It's a classic 80-20. So the owner wanted to create an additional lot on an existing parcel. There's only one house on lot one. That 20% is lot one. That's due to the need for a septic system. And again, I mentioned already, we do permit a home on the 80%. Couple other things to note here. I wish I would have drawn this on here, but I didn't. So this is the result of our land use and growth management update from 2014. This is what we require for plats outside the city now. If we had not changed those rules, those policies, they would have been able to do 3 piano key lots along the frontage of that property. So the rules were 200 feet of frontage and 3 acres. So that's about 600 feet of frontage. That'll get them about 3 piano key lots. And so they would go all the way back basically into 3 lots. So with that, you can find our growth management plan on the website. Some video, there's a pretty cool video there that we did back in the day. If you're interested in watching that, it's probably somewhat helpful also. So is there any more questions?
Dan, can you go back to the very first slide? I think you said this. I just wasn't sure if this came across. Yeah. The second slide then. Yeah. And so I don't know that it is explicit here, but you know, we've heard and we've talked a lot about limiting the amount of development outside the city to really encourage and direct more of that to where our services and our infrastructure is inside the city. And that is absolutely a goal and objective, but of the comprehensive plan. But it's I would say the primary goal of doing what we're doing here is to reserve and preserve land for future growth of the city and the urbanized area. If you, that's really what driving this sort of planning for outside of the city. If we allowed the sort of subdivisions to go on outside the city where go back to at the end of the presentation, Dan, well, that's actually me. We don't really have an example of the piano key setup, but let's just say, let's leave it on here. If before these rules were in place, as Dan said, you could have 3 piano key lots extend the entire length of this tract here, and it would render it unurbanized. You couldn't urbanize this ever, never. In the future, you would basically landlock the city in from ever expanding expanding out into the future and grow. So the pattern, at the very least, allows enough room, reserves the land so that it could be urbanized. You could put streets in. You could have subdivisions at an urban density if you do not divide it up in a way that prevents that. So probably the preeminent goal here is to really reserve and preserve land, and that's for future city urbanized growth. And as an ulterior outcome of that is actually minimizing the sprawl. That is absolutely achieving the objectives that you've been discussing with us here the last couple months.
Bill, I appreciate what you're saying, and it is, I think the city's doing everything it can to preserve that potential for urban development, urban density development to the west. When you look at a lot map, which I know you have, and you go north from Topeka, between the city boundaries and say 46th Street, there are hundreds and hundreds of 3-acre tracts. Many of them, most of them built on already. And that is essentially a barrier to future expansion of the city of Topeka to the north. And we're essentially creating a new community, north of 46th Street and in that environs. So it's a dilemma, and it's something that has been going on for many years.
But I want to be clear about this. And I don't, yes, you're correct. I want to be clear, though. That is not because of the current policies.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
Okay, well, it sounds like that's what is being talked about, is that we have policies in place that are encouraging 3-acre lots that are limiting growth outside the city. That is the opposite of what the land use and growth management policies were adopted to do. And so we are trying to correct a multi-decade situation.
Bill, and I'll get off of this. I apologize once again for taking this much time, but my concern is to the north, where I lived for 20 years. Its development and urban densities is made possible because of the Half-Day Creek Interceptor and water, which originates in the city of Topeka. So that has been a longstanding phenomenon, and it's certainly not the fault of the current regulations that you're using to have more orderly planned growth in other directions from the city limits. So you guys are doing a hell of a job. That may not come across, but you really are, and for the most part.
And Bill, I might mention that I supported that last subdivision, but in my mind, when you have a subdivision like that that's on the city sewer already, and you're getting 30 or 40 houses, that's 30 or 40 less 3-acre lots that are potentially built out. So the way I'm looking at it, the way I see it, was that actually would help that when the city gets, if it gets annexed in the future. Now you have 30 or 40 less houses on 3-acre lots, and because you're more dense in that area. So that was kind of, it's a different way to look at it, but that's kind of why I was so for it, was that it gives us the north side of, some more housing, but not using up as much land.
Yeah, you're right. There's still a demand for 40 houses. It's manifesting itself in a different way than 40 3-acre lots. You're
right.
Correct. Yep.
And that's the most common, is buying a 3-acre lot and building a house. Because
we probably saved 80 acres somewhere else by doing that. But that's
right.
Another way to look at it. Yes.
When I voted for that, that's what I had in my mind, was this is saving a lot more land other places, because this is where they wanted to be. That was so just another way to look at it.
Okay. Are there anything else? Any other discussion? Like I said, we'll come back next month and we'll do a more look at some of our thoughts on how we can drive a little more infill, a little more density than our policies or standards allow now. So we really would appreciate feedback on that. If there's nothing else, I can give you a quick update on communications.
Finder, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So I probably should know this, but I don't. Are there like subdivisions being built or approvals for permits? I guess there are, like within the city limits, that we're just not seeing? Because I feel like, I don't know, like when I look at when some of these bigger ones come up, like you said, like we kind of have a distorted opinion now, is that you may be filtering out a ton of requests, and then we see these and then we get worked up about them or where their location is. And maybe there's been a ton of approvals like within the city. So we're like, oh, well, relative, like this is, okay, so are there things like that we're missing or that we should be made aware of, or like that I should know where to find that information on?
Well, Commissioner Messina, that was the purpose of tonight's presentation, is we are setting records for new unit counts in the city in the last 2 years, in the last 15 years. So I don't know that everybody was aware of that. And by showing you what I showed you tonight, that's pretty much the information you would want to know. There's nothing else within the city that is being permitted that I didn't show you tonight.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of, are you seeing things that are being redirected towards the city because of these policies outside the city? And that, to me, is what I think we were trying to get across tonight, is we are doing collectively, and this isn't me or just Dan and I, it's collectively as a community, we are seeing the fruits of some of the policies, some of the seeds of these policies that were put in place years ago, of curbing the sprawl, encouraging more of the investment inside the city, and it's coming to some fruition now. That's what I wanted you to see tonight. But no, the only thing you wouldn't see is, in fact, you don't see a lot of, in fact, I'm going to say maybe 2, 3 major plats outside the city within the last couple of years. I would say before 2015, well, before the recession, you were seeing 2 or 3 a month outside the city that would come to you. So context is important. It has definitely died down. It is definitely going in the right direction. But when you see these 39 lot subdivisions or whatever it may be, I don't think you're going to see many more of those. You may see a few 10, 12ers, but people aren't putting in roads outside the city. It's kind of expensive. So unless you already have an area that has that sewer, you're not going to see that. So there's, yeah, I'd say you're not seeing a lot of things that come through us because of those policies. So you're not seeing that on your end outside the city.
Hey, Bill, I
appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Bill, could I give you a suggestion?
Mm-hmm.
On the planning and development report, the slide number 5, which showed the subdivisions that were discussed earlier, had the little yellow dots.
Yeah.
If we could see the number of lots that correspond to each of those yellow dots, I think that would be helpful information.
Okay.
I mean, you have the number of lots for the named subdivisions through there, but you mentioned earlier that there's significant number of lots, or I think I heard that there were a significant number of lots represented by those.
I didn't mean to say that. If I did, those are permits. So you could have 1 unit for each one of those yellow dots. It just,
okay. All right. Okay.
Or you could have a Wheatfield Village with 1 dot and it's 173 units. So, but most of those yellow dots are going to represent 1 to 2 unit
okay.
development.
All right.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you.
Hey, Bill, I had a quick question to add, because I do agree that these numbers are great just to see the growth and development. But historically, when you look at that tier 1 part of the city, a lot of the issues in housing in those areas is blight. Is there a way that we can capture development as far as decreasing the vacancies and addressing the blight in those areas. Because I know, like, for instance, in downtown with the master plan, they plan on adding housing in the middle of the city. So that might be like a new build permit, but there's also, movement in the city to address blight. How are we going to be capturing that within kind of the metrics that we have?
All right, Commissioner Herron, you're talking about rehabilitation and repurposing of buildings. Is that when you say how you?
Yeah, because when you're thinking about, in the middle of the city, you're probably not necessarily going to have a huge subdivision be created unless you clear out some housing. But there's still development that can be happening in the city, but it won't look like a new build permit. It'll look at people pulling permits to remodel a home. So there's a way to capture that development, because I think that's also going to be a major move in our city and something great to capture. And I don't know if it'll just show up as the additional column, or if there's a way to kind of really specify that type of development and growth in our city. Because I think in the inner city, that's really what you're going to see more of than you would see a whole subdivision being platted just because of land availability.
I like it. Yeah, we have that in our monthly reports. No, you know what? I think we just show the new units where they're being created, but we have that info for rehabs. And as you saw, that one line that, there were a substantial number of rehabs and additions, particularly in 2020. We could do another map, another slide, just like the new unit one, just for rehabs. And then you can kind of get a sense of, hey, do we have what kind of distribution do we have on that? And it may tell a fuller picture for everybody.
Yeah, because I think as much as 11% of the housing stock was blight. So I think that'd be great to capture.
I like it. So we'll do it.
I would really value seeing that as well. Thanks.
In fact,
I agree with that as well.
Sorry.
Bill,
we'll update we'll create that slide and we'll send it out just so you have it for 2021.
Bill, is that type of development what you're targeting with the tax rebates? With the plan that Washburn and other organizations agree to have their taxes rebated?
Yeah, in fact, we measure how much all right, so we'll put something together, add that to the mix. That's a great addition for future reports. Thank you. Anything else before I go to communications? Okay, my one communication or two is that to report back, City Council approved the Meadowlark subdivision that we were just talking about, or accepted it. You approved it. They accepted the dedications. And then B, they overturned your recommendation on the dog park. They needed 7 votes to change your recommendation, and they voted 7-2 to basically deny the PUD amendment. So that is where that's at, or where it landed.
Bill, what does that mean? Does it mean that it's a dog park for infinity now? Is that basically what it is?
No, it means that they cannot operate it as a dog park. That is no longer a use allowed on the PUD. So it becomes an enforcement issue now, because
So now it's
obviously they have it improved to do that. So now we have to figure out what that means from an enforcement of not allowing them to use it.
So now it's an empty lot that they can't take dogs on, basically.
Well, yeah. When does it become a dog park and when doesn't? I sense that you could probably take down the fences and people could still use it informally, but I've got to talk to legal about moving forward on that. But didn't know if any of you saw it, so wanted to update you on that. And that is all my communications.
All right. Well, thank you. It's been a very informative meeting. Appreciate the questions and suggestions back and forth. Anybody have anything else for the good of the cause? All right. Not seeing anything. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Do we do motions to adjourn, or we just adjourn? I keep forgetting.
You can take a motion to adjourn and then a second and
All right. I will take a motion to adjourn.
This is Commissioner Herron, and I motion to adjourn.
I'll second Commissioner Dean.
All right. Sounds like we are done. Thank you, everybody. See you next month.
Have a good night.
Thank you.